Well, good evening. It is good to have you with us this evening for our Sunday evening Bible study. And as we get started this evening, Terry is still under the weather, and so we're not going to have a hymn this evening, but we will start our service with prayer and then a time of fellowship before we take your prayer concerns and then get into the scriptures. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 34 tonight. And so you can turn there. But as we get started, let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask for His blessings on our time together this evening. Father, we come to you tonight just grateful that we can come together as a church and study your word. Father, I pray that as we come away from this morning's service where we heard in song just the wonderful portrait of what you've done for us by redeeming us, by offering us salvation through Christ. Father, help us to go into this next week leading up to Resurrection Sunday excited and looking forward to an opportunity to worship you on the day we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. And so, Father, help us to be mindful of inviting people to worship you and to gather, whether it's here at Oak Ridge or at another church. Father, help us to encourage people to be worshiping you on Sunday. Father, we pray for those in our number that are sick, and we just pray, God, that you would heal them, that you would help them to have a restoration of their health. And Father, we just look forward to them being able to be back with us for worship. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Take a few moments to fellowship, and then we'll come back together and take your prayer concerns. Hey. Well, as we get started this evening, we'll take your prayer concerns. Two that I have already written down on the list. Our youth are adjusting to the new teachers that they have. This morning they had an amazing teacher for Sunday school, about this tall, beard. I mean, really good looking. Um, uh, Misty sit in the corner. No, I'm just figuring it. But no, we had a good time in Sunday school this morning, and they it was really good to teach them. But walking out this morning, because I had to walk out a little ahead of Misty, she was walking with Cooper and getting something. As I was walking out, I had this moment. I didn't even tell Misty this. I had this epiphany as I was walking out. I was like, I am no longer a youth pastor. I said, now I'm one of their dads. And I said, I'm thinking, it's a completely different dynamic now than it was, more than 10 years ago when I was a youth pastor. And so we had a good time. They found out we played a matching game as we got started. And we're in Genesis 34. If you haven't turned there yet, you can turn there while I share this. We played a matching game just to get them started, just to, get them talking a little bit, had them pair up so that they could play this matching game of someone's famous name and then what is their real name according to whatever source is given, their real name. One was like the Wizard of Oz. He's got like 10 names. Oscar, da-da-da-da-da-da, there's like 10 names. But one of them on there was Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Does anybody know what Shaggy's real name is? It's not Shaggy. It's Norval Rogers, in case you needed to know that. Does anybody know the man in the yellow hat from Curious George? Anybody know his name? In case you are ever in a pinch and you need to know it, it's Ted Shackelford. So it was, things like that. So we just had it, and they were like, one of them, I will not out this youth, but one of them said, what is the Michelin Man? I was like, it's Michelin Man. And he's like, who's that? And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. So we will not out Tegan on that. And he was just so him and Caden, it was so funny. They had paired up and they were sitting there talking, and he's like, and he wasn't quiet about it. Him and Caden were just talking. He's like, what? And I don't even think I pronounced it incorrectly like he did. And he just said it, and he was just like so sensitive. Who's the Michelin Man? Like, and Caden's like, I don't know, and they're trying to figure it out. And so we had a good time with them this morning. So nevertheless, I'll have more stories, I'm sure, in the weeks and months to come. So, have we went back live yet? Have we went back live on the video? Okay, never mind. I was going to say something else. I'll stop. I will ask you guys to cut it off because I do have something to share at the end when we get that far. So, nevertheless, we're in Genesis chapter 34 tonight, and we are continuing in our study of the book of Genesis, and we're not too far from being done with this section of the text in Genesis. And so this time, we are looking at a very unfortunate time in the life of Jacob and his family. And so to keep us on track with the biblical timeline, since last week when he moved from Mahanaim to Sukkoth, then to Shechem, there has been from the time he met with his brother Esau, there has been a total of 9 years that have elapsed. We don't know how long he was at Sukkoth. We don't know how long he was at Shechem before the events of chapter 34, but we know that it has been 9 years total. And so you see the ages of the people in this section of the text. Jacob is over 100 at this point, and Leah and Rachel are somewhere in their early 50s. And so we're still around the year 1680 this time. And so we're going to start off with verses 1 through 4 and look at the heart of the story with Dinah and Shechem. So look at verses 1 through 4 with me. It says, now Dinah, the daughter Leah had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me this girl as my wife. And so Dinah is the only daughter of Jacob that is named in Scripture. And so for her to stand out in the regard that she is listed, or named, I guess I should say, she's listed with her brother. She is named as one. And then we have this story here that involves her. There's really no doubt for us that she did exist, that this is a true story and everything else that comes along with it. But we find that she is the only daughter named of Jacob. But if you were to, and don't do this, but if you went to Genesis 37 and Genesis 46, you would read that there is a mention of other daughters of Jacob. She's the only one, though, that is named like her brothers. And so we see that, that's the case. Well, what ends up happening here is we see that she has left the confines of her family's compound of tents, if you want to call it that. They had settled outside of the city of Shechem. They had bought land, and so they were living there. They pastured their animals there, and so she left that area where the family's tents were, and she went to visit, as it says in the scriptures, the women of the land, meaning that she was going to visit with some Canaanite women. That's what it's getting at there. And Dinah is believed at this point in time to have been about the age of 15. And most likely went to go visit other young ladies that were her age. Canaanite, even though it says women of the land, it was, most likely ladies that are young ladies that were her own age. And the reason that we can sort of understand that she is the age that it's believed that she was at is the fact that when she left the confines of the family land or the family tents, when she left to go visit these other young ladies, she didn't have a male escort with her. In that culture, even today, it is hard for a woman to go unescorted in Middle Eastern culture. It's something that just doesn't happen. Even back then, that was the case. And so what that means is that she was probably still considered to be a kid, even though she was 15. And if you've ever had a 15-year-old in your house, they don't think they're a kid, but they are still a kid. And in this culture, because she didn't have a male escort with her, and one of her brothers or one of the servants that went with her, most likely she was still a teenager. And so, so there was no real need for a male chaperone with her because of the situation. But nevertheless, one thing that was kind of interesting that I read this week that sort of took me aback when I read it in a commentary was that they placed some of the blame on this for this event on Dinah for hanging out with the wrong crowd, and I was like, that's not right. That's not right in the farthest reaches of the imagination, because although there were prohibitions on the Israelites. We'll call Jacob's family the Israelites. Although there were prohibitions for them against intermarrying with the Canaanites, there were no prohibitions for them to engage them in business or anything else. There is no prohibition from them interacting with them. They just couldn't marry them, and so it sort of rubbed me the wrong way when it said that it was Dinah. Partly Dinah was at fault for the event that happened, when obviously that's not the case. But nevertheless, Shechem, whose dad is the ruler of the city and the region, the area there that they lived in, Shechem, who the town or the city was named for, his dad Hamor was the ruler. He goes, finds Dinah, Shechem does, with these Canaanite women. He took her and he raped her and then basically kept her in his house, basically kidnapped her. For all intents and purposes, that's what's happened in this story. And one thing that I found interesting that I read this week was that this kind of activity, this kind of way of life was not uncommon among the Canaanites, especially when it came to rulers and their families. This sort of thing was just commonplace, and I thought that is so disturbing on so many levels. But nevertheless, we know that I think that we would all agree that what Shechem describes as love, I think we would all see with common sense that it was more lust than anything. and he says he wants to marry Dinah, and he has these strong emotions for her or towards her. So Shechem demands of his father to make her his wife, basically. But this helps us to understand, or I guess further support Dinah's age. Look at the very last of verse 4 there. He says, get me what? Get me this girl as my wife. So he even knew that, her age was obvious, that she wasn't old enough to marry on her own or anything like that. So we see that he wants his father to go and, talk with her dad and get her to officially be his wife. And so we look in verses 5 through 12, and we see where Hamor goes to haggle for Dinah. He goes and haggles with Jacob over Dinah. It says, beginning in verse 5, it says, when Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father, Hamor, went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields as soon as they heard what had happened. They were shocked and furious because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. But Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me the young woman as my wife. So somehow word gets back to Jacob as to what has happened with Dinah. We don't know, if it was a servant. We don't know if it was one of the Canaanite young women came and told them. But during this time, when he finds out, his sons, probably all of them, but especially the older ones, are all out in the field tending to the livestock. And Jacob doesn't do anything until they get back from taking care of the animals and taking care of the livestock. And so we're not exactly, the way it reads, we're not told if the sons came back and then Hamor showed up, or if Hamor showed up and then the boys come in from the field, or if they both come walking into the house about the same time. We don't know, but the timing of that is really close from the way it reads, that these events just sort of both showed up around the same time. And so about the time they came in from the field was about the time that Hamor and Shechem go to talk to Jacob about Dinah marrying Shechem. And so Hamor made his case, and he makes a hard sell for Jacob. And he even thought that he might entice Jacob to join families, intermarry, and allow the marriage to happen. And look at verses 8 through 10. This is his sales pitch. He said, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. So basically, Hamor's offer for Dinah to marry Shechem is the opportunity for Jacob's family to intermarry with the Canaanites and to settle in the land and to use the land, to live in the land and do business with them. And so what Hamor does not understand, obviously, is that not only had Jacob's mother, but Jacob's grandfather had been very intentional about their children not marrying with the Canaanites. And therefore they sent servants or their son all the way back to the family land, so to speak, in Haran so that they could marry inside of their extended family. And Hamor is oblivious to this. And so even though he's making a really good pitch and he really thinks this has got to be good enough for Jacob to allow us to intermarry, he has no clue that Jacob is ready to shoot it down, because it's not going to happen. It's not their custom. And so it wasn't appealing to him at all. And so Shechem, probably could see the disgust on some of the brothers' faces and probably could tell that his would-be father-in-law is not very keen on this. And so what does he do? Like any, brash young man, he thinks, well, I can probably sweeten the pot. I can probably make it a better deal. So he'll agree to it. And so he opens up his mouth and says, ask whatever you want for a bride price, for a dowry, and I'll pay it. I will make it happen. And it sounds like a slick salesman there, doesn't it? We can do anything you need. We'll provide whatever you want. It's exactly what it sounds like. And that's what happens here is he makes that. And, he's offering to buy Dinah for whatever. Now, it's one thing for them to have the custom of exchanging livestock and things as a dowry and one thing. He's basically coming and offering to buy Dinah. He's saying, he's sort of pulling out his wallet and saying, now, how much does it cost for your daughter? And you can imagine how offensive that would be for a father, especially in this situation. But this offer to buy Dinah is probably what set her brothers off. Or Jacob's sons, probably what set them off. And to them, Dinah was being discussed as something that could be bought and sold. So had Jacob sold her to Shechem, what's to keep Shechem from selling her to somebody else? And so, as we'll see later, that the brothers really take offense to this. And to them, as we'll see at the end of the chapter, they view the way Shechem's talking about their sister as if he's treating her like a prostitute, something to be bartered, something to be bought and sold. And so we'll see the dangerous ramifications of his comments about wanting to pay for Dinah. And so in verses 13 through 18, here we see the deceit of Jacob's sons and what they agree to with Shechem and Hamor. It says, beginning in verse 13, it says, because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go. Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. So, something we see here is that after doing such a good job of leading his family spiritually and leading them as he should, when it came to dealing with Laban, chasing him down, and with his brother Esau, and all of the things that Jacob had done to really lead his family like he should have, we see that he just sort of takes a step out of the way and gives the boys free reign of making, this decision. Now, does that mean that Jacob was sort of, washing his hands of it, hoping that the boys would do something that would get retaliation for Dinah because of whatever? Maybe. Was it that they were brash and basically saying, Dad, we're going to handle this? That could have been it as well. We don't really know because we don't know all the ins and outs of the story. But what we do see here is that the boys take over, and his sons, we're not told which ones, but most likely it would have been Reuben and Simeon and Levi, because those were the three oldest ones. And so most likely it was the three of them. We don't know, there could have been another one in on it, but most likely it was those three. And they told Hamor and Shechem that the two people groups could not intermarry unless the Canaanites agreed to be circumcised. That was the only way that this would work. And so, we cannot be surprised that Jacob, as he is still referred to here, not Israel, but Jacob, that Jacob had sons who acted deceitfully and deceived the Canaanites. We can't be surprised at that. We can't be surprised that they watched Dad for all these years, and then when it came their turn to deal with somebody, that they were deceitful about it. And the sons of Jacob, used their sign of the covenant with God, they used it as a means of treachery and revenge towards the Canaanites. And so the offer was for the Shechemites to be circumcised, and then Jacob's family would intermarry with them. And you almost hear Jacob's sons making this offer with them, and Jacob starts to speak up, and they just sort of put their hand over Dad's mouth, like, "We got this," And it's this, we're going to take care of this. We're going to deal with them like we need to. And so Hamor, probably at Shechem's behest, agrees to do it. They agree to do this. And so we read in verses 19 through 24 where they go back and talk to the rest of the men of Shechem, and the Shechemites agree to it. So look at verses 19 through 24. It says, "The young man who was the most honored of all his father's family lost no time in doing what they said, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to the men of their city. 'These men are friendly toward us,' they said. 'Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours, but the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms, and they will settle among us.' All the men who went out of the city gate, agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised." So Shechem is blinded by his lust. I'm not going to even say it was love, but his lust for Dinah. So Shechem is blinded by this, and he immediately, he's basically leaving Jacob's tent, grabbing his dad by the arm and saying, "Let's get back to town and talk to the guys about doing this." And so while addressing the crowd, though, they have the men of the city there. Hamor and Shechem are talking to them, and they try to sell this idea of being circumcised as a great benefit, not just to Shechem, but to all of the men of the town or the city of Shechem. And, because there's the promise of new blood coming into the family, so to speak. And they're explaining this, but there's only one caveat, and that is that they have to be circumcised. And so when speaking with Jacob's sons, we don't see the deceitfulness of Hamor and Shechem as we do when they're talking with the men of the city. And so there's no doubt that, Jacob's boys are like, "Oh, we got them now." And Hamor and Shechem are walking back to the city of Shechem thinking, "Oh, we've got them now." Both sides are thinking that they're going to be able to deceive the other side and get the better of the other side. And we realize, here in just a few moments, that Jacob's family are the ones that really are the winners, if you want to call it that, in the deceit game. So, they go and they tell them all of this, and, Hamor and Shechem are trying to do their hard sell to the men of Shechem as to why they should be circumcised. And, in verse 23, we see that they viewed it as an added bonus if the men were circumcised, and then they were able to assimilate Jacob's family into the people of Shechem. Because it says there in verse 23, "Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms, and they will settle among us." And so, their thought is, hey, if we do this, we'll start intermarrying, and then all that money out in the field, all that stuff we see over there, it's going to get dispersed amongst the men or the people of Shechem. So they see on the hoof, they see dollar signs. They see all of these animals, all of these livestock, because Jacob is a very wealthy man, and he hasn't even inherited his father's inheritance from Abraham yet. So Jacob is about to become, when Isaac finally dies, Jacob becomes a very, very wealthy man. And so they see just what Jacob has, and they're like, all right, we can get that. We just got to do this, and we'll be able to intermarry with this family. And so that's what they do. The men are, I'm guessing they put it to a vote or they just agreed to do it. But in verse 24, the men of Shechem agree to be circumcised so that they can basically assimilate Jacob's family into their own. But then we read in verses 25 through 31, and for the last of this chapter, we read about what happens and how Simeon and Levi rescue Dinah. Look at verses 25 through 31. It says, 3 days later, while all of the men were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" So verse 25, when we see that, it tells us the extent of Jacob's sons' vengeance and their retaliation against the Shechemites. So what they did was they convinced them to be circumcised, and then on the third day after they were circumcised, as it says there, the pain was so great that Jacob's sons could very easily overtake them. Something I read this week that I never thought about when reading this story was the fact that it said, especially in their days when they didn't have the medical care that we have today, especially for something like this, that obviously there would be pain from the incisions and swelling and stuff like that, but most likely the men were also being affected by a fever as well, which makes complete sense. And if you've ever, I know everybody's had a fever at one time or another, and if you've had a really bad fever, think about how badly you want to get up and fight then. You don't, because you feel drained, and so, not that Simeon and Levi should be, applauded for their cunning, but, from a tactical standpoint, that was a brilliant stroke on their part to convince them to do this and then take advantage of it the way they did. Still doesn't make it right, but the mindset that they had in doing this was kind of unbelievable. But so when the men were attacked, they were unable to defend themselves. And so Levi and Simeon are able to slaughter all of the men, and chances are that was any male, regardless of age, so that there wouldn't be any men left to come and attack them down the road. So even, teenage boys, young boys would have been slaughtered too. So there are some things to note about this attack with Simeon and Levi. First off, their age, the age of the boys, probably plays a little bit into their willingness to attack an entire city by themselves. Despite the fact that these men, the men of the city are, pretty well incapacitated at this point, but Simeon and Levi are about 19 and 20 years old. So they are brash young men, think that they can conquer the world. So what's one little city when they've, dishonored their sister and their family? And so think about how many of us have made rash decisions due to youthful stupidity around 19 and 20 years old. I see some heads shaking. Yeah, I remember that time. Yeah. Well, that's what they did. They did that. They were about that age when that happened. Second thing to know about this part of the story is that these were two of Dinah's full-blooded brothers. Not the fact that not that it mattered that some of them were half brothers with Dinah, and not that had a real bearing on it, but these two were two of the ones that were probably closest to her. And so we're not told why Reuben, who is the oldest one, who would have been about 21 at this point, we're not told why he didn't join in. He may have been the tattletale, he may have been the goody two-shoes, and if they had told him, he would have told Dad, and then they wouldn't have been able to, who knows. We don't know why Reuben didn't get involved, but the reason the rest of the sons of Jacob probably did not participate is they were probably too young. Some of them were very young. Even Joseph was very young at that point. And so most of them were too young to have participated in something like that. But we don't know why Reuben didn't. But lastly, I think what we read about in this story is something that shows us, again, that the Bible does not hide um, the bad and spotlight just the good in the lives of the people that we read about. And that I think that from my own perspective, I think that makes it a reliable witness to the biblical events. That we can trust what the Bible says because it doesn't sugarcoat stuff. And the fact that Moses wrote the book of Genesis, and Moses came from what tribe? Levi. The fact that he would not sugarcoat his own ancestors' part in this makes it reliable to us. Makes not just the story and the event that happened, but the rest of the biblical stories that we read. And so, Levi, whose descendants would be the priestly line of Israel, is one of the two causing this bloodbath in Shechem. And so it's something that helps us see that the Bible can definitely be trusted. But, Simeon and Levi, they come in and they massacred the men of Shechem, and they took Dinah with them. They rescued her from Shechem's home. And they also took the women, the children, all the plunder, all the livestock. Basically, if it wasn't nailed down, it sounds like they took it with them. And so they took those things. And, there's no way of us knowing the population of the city of Shechem about this time. There's no way for us to even get a good grasp as to how many people were there. But when we say, the city of Shechem, we think about like the city of Morganton or the city of Hickory or the city of Charlotte. Chances are this city was not very large, that there was not a whole lot in it because, and I didn't read anything this week that's pointed one way or another, but something that made me think about this is the fact that Jacob's family did not have the infrastructure for taking captive thousands of people. They didn't have the manpower to keep those people captive. People would have just been running off left and right if it was thousands of people. But the other side of that is Jacob's family at this point. When they go into Egypt, there's 70 of them, but that's years from now, and so it would be probably around 20 more years or so, 20 or 25 years. I'd have to do the math. But nevertheless, they'd have 70 then, and that's with women and children and everybody. But here, there's probably only 25 to 30 in Jacob's household, in their compound of tents. There's probably only 25 to 30, and most of them are under 18. So there is no way there's no way from a common sense perspective that Shechem was some massive Roman type city, but this is most likely a small walled city with probably not many more people in it than Jacob had in his family. But nevertheless, the fact that they were able to pull this off is unbelievable nonetheless. But Jacob, when they show up with all of these women and all of these children and all of these animals and all of this plunder, Jacob reprimands his sons and fusses at them for acting before thinking. And that's really what he's fussing at them. You didn't even think about what this means for me. Because if the Canaanites and the Perizzites, if they get angry and they, get up together and they come in force against us, I can't do anything. I'm going to die. You're going to die. You can almost hear the dad in that. Can you believe you did this? Look at what and that's what Jacob's doing, because he's got two, barely out of being a teenagers right there in front of him, saying, "Guys, you did not think about what this means for the rest of us. They could come and slaughter Dinah. They could slaughter your mother. They could kill us all, and you didn't even think about that." And we read in verse 31, the only response Simeon and Levi have is they tell their dad, "Well, should he have treated her like a prostitute?" That was their only defense. And not to say that they shouldn't have rescued her or tried to do something. Definitely not saying that, but, it's just, that's their only defense. That's their only statement back to their father. And, something that's kind of interesting is Jacob reprimands his sons in this moment. And he fusses at them. He accuses them of acting before thinking. But when Jacob is on his deathbed in Egypt, years later, we see that this has still not left him, that he is still dwelling on it, hung up on it, however you would want to phrase it. Because when he is giving blessings and prophecies to his sons and sharing all of this stuff, he recalls the anger and the wrath of Levi and Simeon and what they showed against the city of Shechem. Because he couples them together in his farewell address to his sons, this time of blessing and prophecy. He links them together and talks about their wrath and talks about their anger towards the city of Shechem. And so, again, their only argument is this one phrase, back to their dad. That's the only thing that they have to stand on. And so, that's the end of the chapter for us. But in Genesis 34, the lesson that we learn is that we teach our children whether we realize it or not. We see that on full display here, because up until Jacob wrestles with God and meets his brother, meets with Esau, his life has been a series of deceptions. It's just been one deception after another, and his deceptions have never been malicious in the sense. Now, obviously deception is malicious. Don't hear me saying otherwise. But it's not malicious from the sense that he's trying to physically harm someone or bring about someone's death. He's never doing that towards someone else. His malicious deception is never that way. His deceptions have been malicious in the area of being greedy, gaining possessions, gaining wealth and things for him, but never a physical harm to someone in the chance that they would be hurt, injured, maimed, or killed. Not that made it okay, but that's the difference in the deceptions that he and his sons pulled. But here we see that two of Jacob's oldest sons had learned how to be deceitful from their father. They learned it by watching him. There's no doubt about it. And so the deception they learned had this deadly impact on the people of Shechem. And so the deception they learned by watching Jacob, coupled with their unbridled vengeance and desire for revenge for their sister, it just made this volatile mixture that had Jacob pretty much looking over his shoulder out of fear that the Canaanites might come and attack them. Because if that's what they did to Shechem, what would they do to our city? And because, what gets out is in situations like that is not going to be the truth. What's going to happen is, what's going to be shared, and what Jacob is worried about, is that people are going to hear that Jacob and his family have slaughtered the people of Shechem and that they're basically on a warpath through Canaan. That's what people will hear, and that's what Jacob is worried is going to cause the Canaanites to come and attack. Now, typically, the art of deception is not one of those lessons that we look to teach our children, right? It's not one of those things that are like, okay, let's sit down and talk about the Bible. Oh, look how good Jacob deceives people, honey. You need to learn how to do that. We don't teach our children how to deceive people, but our children, nonetheless, are learning from us whether we realize it or not. They're picking up. They are sponges on everything. Even when we think they're not paying attention, even when we think they're not listening, they're watching us. They're learning from us, whether it's our children or our grandchildren. And, they're paying attention to the way we deal with people, the way that we treat other people, the way we speak to people, the things that we condone. All of those are lessons that we're teaching to our children and grandchildren. And I've probably used this example with you before, but the example that comes to mind for me when I think about this, about how kids are always learning from us, whether we realize it or not, is that one time when my boys were young, still below my waistline instead of taller than me, one time at the when we lived in Dry Ponds, our boys were doing something. I don't even remember what they were doing. And Drew said, "Cooper," and he said it with such an inflection on his tone and everything that I was like, I have heard that before. And I was like, oh my gosh, he sounded just like me. He sounded just the same frustration because Cooper had done something, whatever it was. And he he had mimicked me without even, he didn't realize it. I did. Not, I about felt like about that big right then because he had picked that up from me. And, if that's the worst trait that my son has picked up from me, I'll be very glad that he, but, the thing is, I had no clue he was watching. I had no clue that he was catching it. And he did. And so, regardless of whether we think our kids or grandkids are paying attention or even, we think they're oblivious to whatever's going on, whatever we're saying, whatever we're doing, they're taking it all in. They're picking it up. And so they learn so much by observing us. And so often we don't even realize they're watching or that they're listening, more importantly. So if our children and grandchildren, if they are learning lessons from us, then we need to be intentional about what lessons they're learning. We need to be intentional that the lessons that they're learning from us are lessons about faith, because we need to teach them what it means to worship God in church and outside of church. We need to teach them what it means to rely on God when it's a good day and what it looks like to rely on God when it's a bad day. And we also need to make sure that we teach them what it means to live out a life of faith in every aspect of life. Not just when other people are looking at church, but in every part of our life. And so when we do that, when we teach them and are intentional about what we're teaching them, we don't have to worry about the bad lessons that our children may have learned from us. And we won't have to be like Jacob, sort of looking over our shoulders, wondering what our kids have done or what they have learned. Because we can trust that if we're building into them the right lessons, then we can trust that they're going to take those right lessons and use them in the right way. And so that is our study of Genesis chapter 34. And so hope that you've been able to glean a little bit from the scriptures tonight. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Well, that's a good question, first off. And I had not considered that in the grand scheme of things. As far as why Mary would have been considered old enough to, have a child or be married or anything like that, and Dinah would not. I'll have to do some looking on that because the biggest reason that I was reading as to why she was unaccompanied was because she was still considered a child, and which makes sense because in their culture it's taboo for a grown woman to be out unaccompanied. It just is. It's not to say, and this may be an answer. It's not uncommon for them to be married younger like that, like Mary was at that time, because a lot of times in Middle Eastern culture back then, whether it was the patriarch times or in the times of first century, of Jesus, it wasn't uncommon for young ladies in their early teens like that to be married. It's not uncommon to find that. But why they would have allowed her to go unaccompanied into Shechem or to visit with the other girls, beyond the fact that they didn't see her as a woman that had to be escorted, I'm not sure. But it probably had to do with the fact that, because of her age, they didn't see her as needing to be, they probably just felt comfortable to some degree with, her going off by herself because she wasn't old enough. To them, it wasn't her getting attacked and, kidnapped. It was not even on their radar. That wasn't something that you would have thought, though, that they would have heard other stories and probably been more protective and all of that. But it wasn't uncommon for kids that, and I say kids, teenagers to be married in those days. And so probably in Dinah's case, it was probably just they really didn't think anything was going to happen. So with her still being a young woman, a young lady, they didn't think that it was going to be a problem. In Mary's case, she was already engaged to Joseph. So in that case, that probably has more to do with it than anything. She was already engaged. She was already, betrothed to Joseph when she was spoken to by the angel. And so I know that's probably not much of a good answer, but I'll see if I can find a little bit more to sort of give us a little bit more clarity on it. Yeah, it probably. I think the easy answer there is that because Mary was already betrothed, she was already engaged, and so had Dinah been engaged, she wouldn't have been out by herself. She could have been engaged at that age. They could have already. I mean, they didn't have an option for her because they weren't. The family hadn't grown and all that sort of stuff. So the fact for Dinah that just what she wasn't engaged yet, so that may have been the bigger part of it was that they still saw her as a kid to some degree, so they weren't really, she wasn't engaged, so they really weren't thinking in that direction. So right, yeah, right. Any others? That was a good question. That was a challenging one. Dang. Do what? Not that I don't think so. I'd have to go and look at the story or read. I haven't read that far recently. Why is that? Yeah, yeah. That may have been the reason why it was so easy for those guys the sons to. Yeah, yeah. I would agree. That would not be a good town council to be a part of. Well, that would have, because they're trying to intermarry and take the wealth, so it's not uncommon. They would probably try to do that as quickly as they could because they don't want because of Jacob being a nomad, they didn't want him to leave. They didn't, he could have just easily pulled up stakes and left. And so, as far as Dinah getting pregnant, I don't know. Anything extra biblical, I wouldn't put a whole lot of faith in, just because again, God reveals to us what we need to know, not what we want to know sometimes. And it does make it sort of frustrating when we have those puzzle pieces that we're sort of curious about, and we don't have those answers. So, any others? All right. I'm going to go ahead and out him. I wondered who was going to bring up from the male perspective the circumcision. I'm glad, Dean, that it was you. I wondered who was, I figured that's going to be in the question time. Somebody's going to mention that. So, nevertheless, thank you for being here tonight. Just a reminder, if you didn't get a card or if you need a couple extras, there's plenty of, well, not plenty, but there's a few left on the pews. So, be sure to pick one up and be sure to hand it off and invite someone to come join us for worship on Sunday. Just a reminder, we have the Easter egg hunt on Saturday at 11. Sunrise service at 7:30 here in the sanctuary, and then breakfast at 8, and then regular service times at 9:30 and 10:30. And so, hope that you'll be here with us. Larry, can you go ahead and kill the live feed for us for the